everybody. Thank you so much for coming and supporting the culmination of such a wonderful project. It is a great thrill to be here today to launch Closer Than Breathing, 7 Tales by Beck Sutton and illustrated so beautifully by her partner Kane White. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tegan Gigante. I'm a poet and publisher and performer based in Central Victoria, and I'm also a very dear friend of Beck's, and I'm delighted to be here in this capacity to guide you through the proceedings today. We'll start by acknowledging that we do stand on very ancient sacred country, for many years cared for by the traditional custodians of the Jaja. May we remember the land beneath our feet and our connection to it. So, this book has emerged from a Harebrained project. The Harebrained Press project was dreamed up in 2016. Beck Sutton decided to eschew mainstream avenues and publish her own collection of short stories. These stories, or tales as she's called them, in acknowledgement of her literary influences, had been developed over 10 years. They explore personal encounters with spirit in a spiritually bereft world. Conscious that her work defied conventional genres and wishing to realise it in a medium that aligned with its essence, Beck resolved an extreme alternative to desktop publishing. She would employ techniques in use before the computer age to create a 120-copy limited edition. Beck self-funded what may be the first book of its kind in Australia, a 136-page work of fiction that had been typeset, printed and bound exclusively by the writer. Acknowledging the radical and, she says, somewhat foolish nature of her undertaking, Beck dubbed it the Harebrained Press project. Beck spent a year planning, learning and printing at the Melbourne Museum of Printing before relocating to HipCat Printery, an artist access studio just outside of Trentham. Here, her routine involved spending, on average, 20 hours each fortnight setting type by hand before travelling the 260 kilometres to and from HipCat over 2 days. She would print 160 copies of 8 pages and then distribute the type, ready to set again. In August 2018, after months of driving through frosty mornings and nights, Beck decided to put printing on hold until she could buy her own press and work from home. It wasn't until May of 2019 that she found an affordable press large enough to complete her project. After restoring and modifying it, she completed the final 32 pages of her book in February of 2020. As Beck began the final stage of her project, bookbinding, COVID struck. This made attending classes impossible. She was forced to rely on a combination of book learning, YouTube videos, email queries, and experimentation to build the knowledge and skills she would need to bind 120 books. Throughout the project, Beck's partner, artist Kane White, was there to support her and contribute to the project. Kane designed and engraved all the images, as well as helping with troubleshooting, calibrating, and lifting printing presses. Finally, almost 7 years on, Beck is now launching Closer Than Breathing, 7 Tales. Yay! And you know, as an artist and a writer, there's many hours spent alone in the studio, just head down, focused on the work. And it's really special to see so many of Beck's supporters and friends and family here today to acknowledge those long years of work. We'll just take a moment to do a bit of housekeeping. Let's all turn off our mobile phones. Toilets are just out this door and to the left. You'll notice Grant around taking photos and video. So just don't hesitate to reach out if you would rather not be recorded on those devices. Okay, I've got a little bit to say too. I am beyond honoured to be here today in this capacity. As many of you know, today is the culmination of a long, one might say, heroic journey. 10 years in the writing, 7 in its printing and binding. Uncountable hours of human hands creating something extraordinary from nothing. This book is a testament not only to craft in its purest sense, but to the incredible strength and vision of its maker. Of course, makers plural. Kane has brought his wonderful images and printing skills and heavy lifting and moral support. But yeah, mostly Beck. It is the result of many careful material choices. Papers, thread, ink, leather, cloth, and many design decisions. Font, layout, colours, prints, to name a few. And these all culminate in an aesthetic that unifies the materials and design and marries them to their subject. Reading, one feels that the book is a physical emanation of the spirit of the writing it not only contains, but reveals. It is readily apparent that this is a thing of beauty. If you haven't had a close look yet, you have a joy awaiting you. This is a thing of beauty, as Keats intended the phrase, and we might be dazzled into forgetting its purpose, to share with us the imagination of its creator, given form in words and shaped as story. Shifting our gaze below the surface, we meet a constellation of worlds that are realised in marvellous detail. The living world sparkles in these stories. Trees, tools, and people all seem to shine as if lit from within. And this is precisely what their author has achieved. The numinous is not drawn in opposition to the material. Rather, they show us a world of things animated with soul. The care and craft that birthed this physical book reveals its metaphysic. That spirit dwells in the living world around us. Or rather, as these stories came before the book, that the world lives by virtue of the spirit that brings it forth. Things, when made with this in mind, made well, with a purpose of wholeness and integrity, can be clear windows to glimpse something beyond them. The dedication to this book is in part to our mutual teacher, Roger Sauter, who advocated so passionately for a traditional philosophy of work, who introduced us both to that truth. He would be so proud of you, Beck, and this book. These stories remind us that our lives emerge from encounter. Each story offers us characters in complex relationships with the embodied world, to its plants and creatures, to a garden or a willow tree, in such a way as to reveal our modern relationship to matter as utterly gross, as obscuring the beauty and mystery of things. As a small publisher, I play at the edges of an industry dominated by commercial imperatives, questionable production ethics, and an ever-shrinking attention span. Other arts and much of life faces these dire threats. And here we are, graced by an encounter with the numinous and real in a fine physical form. Art with integrity, made by a true artist. Every material used in its making, every stitch and letter sewn and placed with care by a fine human being. It's been an absolute privilege to cheer Beck on from the sidelines throughout this astonishing process. The reserves of patience, perseverance, and commitment to master a challenging craft that she has shown is both humbling and inspiring. I am filled with wonder and gratitude for you, Beck. You are a gift to us all. Anyone who has met her has been graced by the kind, intelligent spirit that shines from you, as it shines from these stories and this book. It is a medicine, or a bowl of delicious, nourishing soup. You will find among its pages characters drawn with an echoing pathos, as human beings understood with clarity and compassion. They will linger with you. The ordinary is transfigured by the richness of symbol, animated with soul and portrayed with heart. Not only the narratives and their subjects, but objects and landscapes resonate with meaning and significance, agents in the stories. The words themselves are lyrical yet economic. Each one is necessary to its story. The awareness that each letter was placed by hand reflects how deliberately they were chosen. There are stunning poetic images and phrases. Its prose sings, and yet there is a sturdy practicality, an intimacy with the nuts and bolts of the things she describes. Nothing is vague, everything clear and discreet, drawn with knowledge of her subjects. This book will outlive you. Their stories will stay with you a long time. They are made for slow contemplation, an antidote to the fast consumption that the overculture pushes. To encounter this book is to touch a longer strand of time, a testament to something enduring that we, as fair creatures of an hour, to slip in a second line of Keats, must find to steady ourselves against the tide. This book is such an anchor and a joy besides, and I know each of you who spend time with it will agree. Congratulations, Beck. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce another of our very great teachers, Harry Oldmeadow. Harry is a veteran educator and writer, the author of many, many books on religion and tradition and the perennialist philosophers. He was the coordinator of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Department at the Trobe University and continues to write and share his knowledge with us all. He's written the introduction to Closer Than Breathing, and please welcome him to say a few words for us. Thank you.
Tegan. You haven't left very much for me to say. Magnificent speech, and you did justice to the book, which is a very difficult thing to do. Now, for reasons best known to herself, if they're known at all, Beck has asked me to say a few words. So here I am. When we met a couple of weeks ago, Beck was reminiscing that this project had taken 7 years. In fact, we learned it took more than that because 10 years of writing before that, so really 17 years, but 7 years is long enough. And she said this with a sort of gentle sigh, to say it's been a long journey. Well, I recounted to her the story of my meeting with my first publisher in Sri Lanka. I sent him a manuscript in 1990, and I went to visit him in 2000, so 10 years later. And the book had just been published, so it took 10 years. And I said to my friend Ranjit, it's taken a long time, 10 years. He looked aghast, gave me a steely look. He said, what do you mean a long time? He said, don't you know that the god Brahma takes more than 20 years to blink? So I've produced your book in less than a blink of an eye. Well, it's a funny thing, time, isn't it? It's all relative. At the same meeting with Beck, I made a reckless and foolish promise. I don't know what came over me. Unsolicited, I promised to speak for no more than 10 minutes. I mean, how foolish can you get? Anyway, I'm bound by that promise. You've been to those meetings where the speaker approaches the podium with a kind of sheaf of notes, sort of riffling through 20 or 30 pages, and you feel rather nervous. You think, oh my goodness, how long am I going to have to listen to this character for? Well, here are my notes for today, ladies and gentlemen. So it will be brief. On previous occasions, I've recalled Cicero's excellent observation: brevity is the charm of eloquence. Now, Cicero doesn't tell us what happens when you have brevity without the eloquence, but I figure brevity in such circumstances is still preferable to the alternative. So I can promise you brevity, if not eloquence. Logan Pearsall Smith, the American jurist. People say life is the thing. I prefer reading. An excellent observation, a very sage observation, except for the fact that reading is living. So reading and life are not separate. And reading is actually life at its fullest. Because after all, here it is that we enter the world of the imagination, which gives us access to all sorts of things which we wouldn't otherwise be able to experience. And of course I use imagination in the Coleridgean sense, which is to say that the imagination is that faculty by which we are able to apprehend truths and realities of a supra-mundane, supra-sensorial kind. So it's one of our most precious faculties, and it's what we engage when we read. One of my students some years ago said to me that she enjoyed reading, but she felt guilty when she was reading. I said, look, for goodness sake, why is that? And she said, well, I feel like I ought to be doing other things. And I said, well, you've got the whole thing upside down and inside out. You should feel guilty when you're not reading. There's the old adage, don't judge a book by its colour. I mean, what a ridiculous notion. Don't judge a book by its colour. For goodness sake, all we have to do is look at the cover of this book, which Tegan's been brandishing in front of you, and we will be well aware of what's within. The cover announces a treasure, a gem, inside. Of course, Beck and Kane and others like them belong in a long and honourable tradition going back at least to the Luddites. Figures have been much ridiculed at the time and ever since. But of course those of us with any sense at all know that the Luddites were right. That mechanisation and industrialisation alienated workers from their work, drove a wedge between art and craft, created a multitude of new slaves, and along with a whole of other things, desecrated the environment. The Harebrained Press is a noble and heroic gesture of defiance, and I applaud it. Now, I must warn you, one thing you need to know about this book. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but to the best of my knowledge, Beck and Kane did not employ a sensitivity editor. You know about sensitivity editors, do you? There's been a lot about it in the media lately in reference to Roald Dahl's books, which I actually find are quite awful books and I have no desire to read them. But this business of changing the text so that no one will be offended is completely appalling. So no sensitivity editor here, you'll have to take your chances. Beck and Kane, we honour your vision. We admire your persistence, your tenacity in the face of many obstacles. We're enthralled by your stories and we are touched, moved, inspired by your handiwork. So, all strength to you. Borghese, the Argentinian, is he? Argentinian, somewhere over there. The Nobel laureate, novelist. He said, I always imagined paradise to be a kind of library. Now hopefully we'll all get into that library one day. But in the meanwhile, we can sample the sort of thing we might find in the Paradisal Library by reading Beck's book. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harry. Now we're all starting to feel like impatient for all the talking to be over so we can get our hands on this book that we're all talking about. But of course we must hear from the artist and writer themselves. It is a great pleasure to introduce Kane White, also a friend for many years. If you haven't encountered his art before, do follow it up after today. They will reward you. Kane White holds a Bachelor of Fine Art from La Trobe University with his main study areas in drawing and printmaking. He has exhibited in Melbourne and Sydney as well as various regional galleries, including here. Aside from a focus in painting and printmaking, White also works in animation, illustration and education. White finds inspiration in a variety of sources, from the Renaissance masters through to 1950s space illustration. He acknowledges the fundamental influence of traditional sacred works and their symbology. White is preoccupied with how the unique imageries of iconography and alchemy in particular draw the viewer beyond the naturalistic and therefore the material sphere and into contemplation of non-physical realities and worlds of meaning. Through his own use of symbolism, narrative, grotesquerie and unconventional perspective, White seeks similarly to displace his viewers from materialist paradigms and encourage them to reflect on the metaphysical, particularly in light of attitudes that are unique to the postmodern age. He explores states of disconnection, alienation, the loss of role and meaning, and our changing relationship as humans with each other and with the rest of the natural world. His prints balance so beautifully the writing and the aesthetic of this book. Anyone who knows them knows how beautiful their dynamic is as partners, and that just echoes through their creative work together. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome Kane White here to talk to you.
Thanks everybody. I've gone one up on Harry. I'm actually completely empty-handed, so I usually type up the speech and I don't read it, so I'm just going to speak from the heart. It's been 7 years. Just reflecting on that, it's amazing it's been so long. It doesn't seem like a long time. Obviously my role was to create some artworks for it. I didn't know what I was getting myself into at the time when Beck asked me, hey, let's go and check out this museum in Melbourne and learn about letterpress. I didn't know what that was either. So we went, had a look, and then I started to realise the amount of work that used to go into printmaking, just simple text. And from then on, it's just been a gradual uncovering of this kind of lost knowledge. There's nothing I can say that can really illustrate just what has gone into this project. There's no manual out there that can tell you how to do this. So I don't want to spend the whole time kind of paying this reverence to Beck's work ethic, but I felt a sense of responsibility. Once we really got into it, and I realised this is going to be significant. I'm a bit of an art history fanatic, I guess you'd call it. And I started to think of stories of how famous artists became remembered. And like I try not to think of myself in the future where my artworks will be or anything like that. Some artists do, but there's always advocates for those people who actually barrack for that person and support them because they believe in them. And it's ironic that after the success is made, then you start to support them. Like when they win an award, or when they make money, or something like this. But I could see this is significant. I don't think there's many people around who actually know how to put all these pieces together, let alone write beautiful stories. So when Beck was trying to get work published in journals and different publications in the traditional sense, the modern day sense, there was always the same sort of response, which was, your work's beautiful, it's beautifully written, we love it, but it doesn't quite fit. And I thought that's so similar to my experience as an artist. I've always just done things the way I want to do them and encouraged my students that I've had over the years to do the same. So we kind of fit together in that way. And once we made that decision, all right, we're going to go the real traditional way, it's just been an adventure ever since. So I feel deeply privileged to be part of this journey. It's actually overwhelming just to see the amount of work that I've actually put in, let alone what Beck's put in. I don't remember doing it. I'm just so busy carrying printing presses. If anyone needs a printing press calibrated, I'm pretty good at that now. But I think the biggest thing was I was encouraging Beck to share her story, the parallel story. So there's her stories that she's written, and then there's the story of going about doing this. So that's something I felt very passionate about, and have just been kind of at her, because Beck is a quieter person and a hard worker, but an introvert, but has a very powerful personality. So I just wanted to encourage her to share the story, so to get the blog going, to get the website up, and then the followers came, everybody got behind Beck, and I'm going to leave it at that, but I just really appreciate everybody coming in. I knew it was going to be successful, of course it was going to be successful, but it was just, trying to clear out any obstructions that would lead us to this moment. So, just so glad to see you all here, and thanks a lot for coming. I hope you enjoy just having a look around and catching up with Beck as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, Kane. And I have to say, you've both done a remarkable job at sharing that journey with us. The newsletter has just been a window into this amazing journey and has helped us all feel like a part of it. It is indeed a triumph to be standing here today with completed books. And now, without any further ado, the guest of honour herself, the marvellous human being who has dreamed up these stories and worked so long and hard to shape them into a book so we might share them all. Please give your warmest welcome to Beck Sutton. First, like to acknowledge the Great Spirit which has informed my work and sustained me throughout this journey. The Great Spirit, called by many names, yet transcending all names, which dwells within each of us closer than breathing. This election is dedicated to two people who've been influential in my creative life. The first is the late Hugh Waller, who many of you will know. Hugh's enthusiasm for my project inspired me right from the beginning. I'm sure he's inspired many of you too in your creative projects and encouraged you in the past. Hugh was actually the person who helped me to choose the paper for the Red Book when I brought all of the paper samples out. Hugh ran the Revere book swathe between his finger and thumb and said, "Yeah, that's sexy." And it was a bit beyond my price range, but I thought, well, I have to have the sexy paper for you. The second person who whose book is dedicated to is Roger Sorda, who Harry mentioned, who's also passed. Roger is a former teacher of mine. And he helped to shape my understanding for work as something meaningful, as vocation. I wanted to actually read an excerpt from one of Roger's books, Mining, Metallurgy and the Meaning of Life, for you today. This is what Roger says. He says, "For our ancestors, most forms of work were spiritual paths, disciplines which shaped those who engaged in them as powerfully as the rituals of church or temple. To work was to make oneself over to a practice which was regarded as much greater than the individual, through which alone the worker could be fulfilled." For my reading today, I'm going to share a shortened version of one of my tales. This is from the perspective of a character named Henry Mellor, writing a letter to his son. When I wrote it back in 2012, Henry's voice came through very strongly to me. It was almost as though I was transcribing a story, so it's one of those beautiful experiences that a writer occasionally has where it feels like the story is writing itself. It's called "I'll Build It of Willow Wood." Son, you'll wonder why I'm writing. It's about what I said on the phone the other day about me not leaving this place. Something I've tried explaining many a time. You never could understand. But how can an old man word it, especially when he's not the talking type? You city folk think it's all nostalgia, an old coot hanging on. Or maybe you think I don't know I'm ailing, that one day I'll forget to take my insulin or have a fall, or my mind will go if it hasn't already. Then it'll be out of my hands. No, it's not nostalgia keeping me here. I'm not the sort to hold on to the past.
Didn't I let you go the day you swung that sack over your shoulder, said you was heading to town? 16. At 16, I put the men to task, took on the farm. And didn't I lay your ma in the ground? Didn't I dig the grave myself under that willow tree? So no, it isn't nostalgia. But as for what, I can't say. Something about the light here in the morning and the way it turns the peppercorns along the drive all gold. Something about the smell of the rain on the grasses moves something in a man. It's Bo when I'm milking. Her belly's rolling under my ear. Last week there was a storm, hardly measured by the gauge, but such a blower there never was. Sent Megsy shaking to the crook of my arm, and there was nothing could calm the silly old dog. Now, I've seen lightning turn night today, and I've seen it strike the Tully's silo, punctured it like a screwdriver through an old bean can, but I'd never seen lightning like this up close. I wouldn't have been of a mind to credit it if someone had told me a force like the fist of the Almighty rattling your bones to beads on a string, a flash so sharp it's like ice that burned to your eyes. Then the thunder, 2 rocks cracking in your bowels, took me back to the war. It was your ma's willow tree had struck, so clean it might have been the devil's own axe. Sorely grieved was I in the morning to find it split flush down the middle in the cleft of the bough, and the only mercy was that it missed your ma's grave by an inch or 2. Sad sight I never saw, that headstone jutting from the broken body of the tree, the leaves like a dead old wreath. She planted it the day she left her ma's house and came to live as my wife. Took it from the willow she'd played in as a girl, chose that clear sunny spot above the dam. Henry, she said to me that day, this'll serve better than a playground for our children and your children's children, same as the land has served your folk. A few years after you came with all the trouble, and they told her she couldn't carry any more. But you never did play in that willow, though she tried to coax you and I built you that swing. You was more of a mind to shut yourself up in your room. It's like you couldn't see what was round you, or if you did there was no worth in it. I thought your mum had spoiled you, made you like that, being her first and last. I was sore in the end because I thought it lost us the farm. You said to me once, it's not the life I've chosen, it's too hard. And I'll give you that, son. It's hard, it's a hard life. There was times when even your grandpa couldn't cope, and he a tough man. 14 I was with the worst of the drought, and the ground turned up her toes and the sky like a big old gold pan rusting up. The sheep caving in around us, mounds of wool in the ditches blowing in the wind. Many a farmer was beat that year. Now I've a sense, and you never forgave me for being so hard. But you have to see, son, I had hopes to make a farmer and a man out of you. And when a man's got troubles, you don't just sit down crying in the dust. That's why when I saw that tree broken round your ma's grave, I knew I'd have to make it good. Standing there, wondering what to do, it came to me. The sense to see to my own end too. That wood was sound, clean under the char as a babe's new skin. Had Tyler's son, the carpenter, take the chainsaw to it that day. After sorting the best from the worst, he sawed it up and planed it down for me. Now I've 12 sound planks to work with. So I've decided to build my box. I'll build it of willow wood. And when the time comes, I'd have you lay me down in it, lay me in the ground beside your ma. And that's part of why I'm writing. I know you wouldn't like it if I told you straight. It's a strange thing, son, building your own box. knowing it's to be your last home, to house the bones that carried you through life. There was nights I'd sit and marvel at these old hands shaping it. These old hands making ready for the day they'd move and bend no more. I'll tell you, this body, given freely by God, serves us for good or ill. And then you get to thinking what you've done with it, this gift. Have you used it to bring something good into life? Has it been a faithful tool for you, mending all that's broken and building things that are worthy to a man? When I was done, I couldn't believe it. The straight wood, the snug corners and that honey grain. The smell, sawdust, sheepskin and beeswax. Smelled like home to me. Wanted to lay me down right there, go to sleep. I never got to tell you how good it was the time you brought the girls out here. They was like a couple of nestlings at first, wouldn't let you out of their sight. I thought their wings were stunted, that they'd lost their voices after what happened to their ma. Damn shame that. Don't know how you got through losing a wife so young. But before long, them girls perked up and took themselves outside. I watched them through the kitchen window, swinging from that willow there was, as though their grandma's spirit called them there. Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. I just feel overwhelmed, just feel so blessed. Thank you. Some of you have come from a great distance. Katerina here has come from, and Frank have come from Canada. People from Queensland, Tam, and people from Melbourne, and yeah, so it's overwhelming. So also the people who have followed my journey throughout the last, at least the last 5 years. Thank you so much for the following, your interest, your kind words that have helped to keep me going, your support. I'd like to thank my editor, Soren Tay Smith, who dedicated so much over so many years to help me bring these stories out into the world. My friend Edward Jones, who's at the sales table, he's up the back there today. Ed's a dear friend of mine who took care of me while I was printing in Melbourne. Tegan Gigante and Harry Oldmeadow, thank you so much for making the event so special today. Wonderful speeches. And also Tegan for your contribution to the book itself, your editing. And Harry for writing the beautiful foreword. True Dowling for your editorial advice. Where are you? There you are, darling, True. Michael Isaacson from the Melbourne Museum of Printing, who's up the back there. If anyone's interested in hearing about the Melbourne Museum of Printing and the possibility of it being revived, please talk to Michael up the back there. Lawrence Finn from Hipcat Printery. Rick Hawkins of Precious Tybee Letterpress in Georgia, for his restoration advice. Adrian Holland and Darren Schneider for your practical support and advice in bookbinding. Steve Bright from Barton Print for donating your guillotining services. My mentors, John Holton, Ian Irvine and Harry Oldmeadow, who fostered my inspiration and brought guidance to my writing vocation. Kai and Quinn Livingston from Harcourt Valley Vineyards for sponsoring today's event with their beautiful wines. Please, I hope everyone gets to enjoy some. Alicia and Sophie for looking after the guests today. Kerry and Mark, the two mummies, thank you. Thank you for your beautiful platters and for all your help. Kerry and Dick in setting up. Grant for videoing and photographing the event. My dad over in the corner here, who's been babysitting my dogs and my cat, which is quite a task. And finally, I would like to thank Kane White for the immense amount of work you have put into this book and for helping me to push past the impossible. Thank you.
I told myself to get through the day without crying, as I did not get through any of these stories. But there is so much emotion bound up in this, so much work, so many years, and we have finally arrived at the moment. It is a great honour to announce Closer Than Breathing, 7 Tales by R.I. Sutton, officially launched into the world. Let's give her another round. Again, so much for coming. Do not hurry away. There is plenty of food and drink and very fine company. So stay, buy a book. Kane's prints are also for sale. Look at all of these marvellous tools and gadgets and just a selection of some of the paraphernalia necessary for a project like this. Please enjoy your afternoon and thanks again.